When a black attorney is unjustly detained and humiliated by police, he decides to respond in a way that will shake the entire system. His quest for justice will reveal a shocking truth about hidden racism and the relentless fight for civil rights. The events that follow will astonish even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the beginning. Mark Johnson, a black attorney and seasoned professional, had just wrapped up a long day at work. Dressed in a formal business suit, he walked confidently down the street, absorbed in thoughts about his upcoming cases, when he noticed two police patrol cars nearby. He thought nothing of it and continued walking, but suddenly heard footsteps behind him. The officers casually called out to him, and he felt his relaxed demeanor instantly shift to tension. He understood what might be coming, but hoped it would end with a simple question. "Good evening, sir," said one officer, a tall man with a cold stare. "Out late tonight, aren't we? Do you live around here?" Mark, keeping his irritation in check, replied calmly, "Good evening. I'm an attorney on my way home. My apartment is nearby. Anything else you need?" The officers exchanged a look. The second officer, stocky and aggressive, stepped forward, extending his hand. "Let's see some ID," he ordered in a tone that left no room for refusal. Mark silently handed over his identification and his attorney license, knowing these documents should have ended any suspicions. But the officer simply smirked, passing them to his partner. The other officer glanced at the ID and sneered. "An attorney? You look just like everyone else we catch in this area. You think we're buying that?" Mark felt a surge of indignation. He was accustomed to these types of looks and snide comments, but not in such an overt manner. He calmly reiterated, "I'm a licensed attorney in this state. I have every right to be here, and frankly, your comments are offensive." The officers laughed, and the stocky one stepped closer, gripping Mark's shoulder. "Listen, lawyer, this isn't your office," he sneered. "If you don't want trouble, stand still and don't act up." Mark firmly removed the officer's hand from his shoulder and said evenly, "Your actions are out of line. This isn't questioning. This is something else entirely. I'm asking you to stop and let me go." The tall officer retorted mockingly, "Let you go? You're serious? Go ahead, file a complaint. You think anyone will believe a lawyer in a suit?" He winked at his partner. "These guys think a suit makes them better than us." Mark understood the conflict was deepening, but he had no intention of staying passive. The next day, Mark went to the police station to file an official complaint. He was determined. Incidents like this rarely resulted in action, but his status and resources gave him a chance at justice. A duty officer, an older man with a stern face, greeted him, eyeing him skeptically before reluctantly asking, "What can I help you with?" "I'd like to file a complaint about the misconduct of some of your officers," Mark said calmly, handing over his documents. The duty officer grimaced, glanced at the papers, and responded with obvious disdain. "Listen, this isn't a cafe. Complaints are filed in a different form at a different time. All supervisors are busy now." Prepared for such resistance, Mark replied firmly, "I have the right to file a complaint, and you're obligated to accept it. I'll be addressing this directly to the chief of police." Clearly irritated, the duty officer called someone on an internal line. Within minutes, a sergeant, a young man with an arrogant expression, entered the lobby, looking at Mark with preemptive aggression. "What's the issue? And keep it short. I'm not here for empty accusations." Mark gave a succinct, factual explanation of the situation. The detention, the disrespectful attitude, the humiliation. He mentioned that he had shown both his ID and license, yet the officers were undeterred. The sergeant listened with his arms crossed, wearing a forced smirk. "Got it. Another lawman who thinks we're doing something wrong," he sneered. "Look, we deal with this every day. Do you think we care that you're a lawyer?" Mark paused and replied, "I think you should care because I'm not just a lawyer. I'm a member of the state committee overseeing the conduct of attorneys and public agencies, including your department." The sergeant's face tensed, though he quickly regained his composure. "So you're trying to scare us with your credentials? Go ahead. We have our own rules and our own ways. You think your committee will scare us?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. Mark, maintaining his calm, responded confidently. "It's not intimidation. It's a fact. I'll prepare the documentation, and each of you will be required to account for this incident. This is my final visit here to notify you of the complaint in person." The sergeant forced a tight smile, clearly rattled, before nodding at the duty officer to signal that the conversation was over. "You can leave now, lawyer," he muttered, but not as loudly. Mark knew this was no longer just about professional pride. This was his personal fight against a system that refused to take him seriously. Early the next morning, Mark prepared a complete set of documents for the official complaint and prepared a press release. He knew this case would have serious repercussions for the officers involved, especially if it reached the public. He reached out to several colleagues, including journalists and activists. Soon, word of his complaint spread within legal circles, and news quickly traveled. By midday, several local media outlets picked up the story. Black lawyer accuses police of discrimination and unjust detention. Mark's phone didn't stop ringing as colleagues and journalists called for details. The police department's press office began scrambling to contain the brewing scandal, while Mark received multiple interview requests. He felt the matter was gaining serious traction. Meanwhile, the police chief who had received Mark's complaint convened a meeting. Realizing Mark's role as a member of the State Oversight Committee, he knew the case could reach his own superiors. One of the officers involved, the same arrogant sergeant who had spoken with Mark, looked concerned. Still, he maintained a calm front before the chief, trying to present the situation as if everything had been handled within the law. "We just need to stand our ground," the sergeant muttered to his colleagues, trying to defend his actions. "Let them make noise all they want. He has no real evidence." Meanwhile, Mark gave an in-depth interview, detailing how he was detained without cause and how his complaint was dismissed at the station. The story resonated, especially among black residents of the city who had also faced bias from the police. The following day, journalists appeared at the station with cameras. The police chief, caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events, quickly realized this wouldn't be easily contained. In an attempt to salvage the department's reputation, he offered to conduct an internal investigation and invited Mark to a meeting to discuss the situation. However, Mark recognized this as an attempt to avoid a public scandal. "I accept your offer," Mark responded politely, "but I have conditions. I insist that the entire meeting be recorded and that representatives from the Bar Association be present." Surprised by this demand, the police chief reluctantly agreed, clearly uneasy. He soon gathered everyone involved, including the sergeant and other officers on duty that night. The meeting, held under media scrutiny and in the presence of public representatives, became a true test for the officers. The sergeant, previously confident in his actions, struggled to answer Mark's direct questions about the detention. Realizing the situation was spiraling, the police chief apologized to Mark, promising an official investigation. But Mark knew this was only the beginning. This was the first step in his battle against a system that had long considered itself untouchable. The recording of the police chief's meeting quickly spread online, drawing widespread public attention. People saw how the officers fumbled and dodged Mark's questions about his rights and the justification for his detention. Public opinion turned sharply against the police, and Mark felt empowered by the support to pursue the case to its end. Days later, the police chief made a public statement, announcing an internal investigation with independent experts. However, Mark wanted more. He demanded the case receive official status and insisted that his complaint be submitted to court, ensuring a thorough review of the officer's actions. He filed a petition calling for disciplinary measures and mandatory retraining for the officers. Not long after, news came that the sergeant and his partner were temporarily suspended pending investigation. The public scandal continued to grow, and the police department suffered significant reputational damage. Mark's actions inspired many who had previously feared asserting their rights. City residents began sharing their own stories of discrimination, and activists organized several protests outside the police headquarters. Weeks later, the case reached court. The hearings drew press attention, and every police action was scrutinized. Officers who once felt untouchable realized they could face real consequences. Confident and determined, Mark presented evidence and recordings to the court, demonstrating that his detention was motivated by prejudice, not law. He pointed to systemic issues that needed reform within the department. The court ruled that the officer's actions were illegal and had violated Mark's rights as a citizen and attorney. The police chief was forced to resign, and disciplinary measures were enacted against the sergeant. The police department announced reforms, including mandatory training on civil rights and anti-discrimination practices. Mark felt satisfied, not only for defending his rights, but also for bringing about meaningful change within the system. His case became an example to many, showing that the fight for justice is possible when one has the courage to stand up for their principles.